Hello everyone, welcome to a new set of video lectures. This and the next block will introduce us to the linear model and how to use it for a regression problem. That is, we are finally going to start building models around data. First, we're going to talk about the linear model and how, despite being such a simple concept, still allows us to build complex models of reality that enable us to gather new insights and test specific hypotheses about our object of study. And now we will start simple by modeling a relationship between just two variables, how to actually fit the model based on some data, and how to interpret that model. Soon after, we're going to see what happens when we start adding more variables, numerical, categorical, how to model interaction effects that are particularly relevant for us when building a model for the purpose of understanding some complex phenomena. And finally, we're going to see that the framework of the linear model allows us to model a very wide variety of nonlinear relationships among variables. And this is particularly useful because reality will hardly ever is linear, but we can still use the simplicity of the linear model. Taking a quick look at the course, we're still going to be around this phase here in which we are building models to learn something new about the object of study and start answering research questions about that study. This block in particular about the linear model is going to be about introducing all the mathematics about it. So how do we model one dependent variable as a function of one independent variable? That would be the simple linear model. And then what happens when we start adding more individual independent variables to the model or more predictors? And then we will see how to incorporate nominal categorical predictors into the model, because by default, we always think about the linear model in terms of numerical variables, but we can always include categorical variables. We're going to see how and what difference it makes for interpreting the model. And this is going to be very useful because it's going to allow us to build a model of reality. Whether reality has to do with numerical variables or categorical variables, we are going to be able to fit a linear model to our data. And then we will see how to go from just modeling main effects to how to model interaction effects, because those are going to be or are going to allow us to build even more powerful models to answer even more interesting questions, or they're going to allow us to control for different factors when we are looking into the possible effect of a factor into the response. So we're going to be able to control for other factors when answering specific questions. And then we will talk about transformations, because a linear model is not just about fitting a line between two variables. It can be a lot more complicated than that. We can fit many different shapes in the model. It's just about maintaining the linearity in the structure of the model, not necessarily in each of the individual predictors. We will see that this will allow us to build even better models of reality to answer our research questions. So what does the linear model look like? Well, let's imagine we have some data about a certain company that sells some kind of product. And here over the y-axis, we have the response, which is the sales. And then we may have three different predictors, or we might be interested in the relationship between sales and three different predictors. In particular, we have the amount of advertising that the company dedicates to the product through TV ads, radio ads, or newspaper ads. And we might be looking into the relationship between, for example, TV and sales. We have a scatter plot over here. Each of those observations relates to one branch of the company. And so if we think about a linear relationship between TV and sales, we might be thinking about a line like this one over here, like the blue line. And the particularity of it is that it's going to assume that the relationship between TV and sales is a straight line. It's a linear relationship. And so we may already see here that, well, it's not really linear, right? It looks like a more proper model would be something like that. But still, this blue line is going to give us some insight into the data, such as, for example, that the relationship between the two variables is positive and how strong that relationship might be. We could also look into the relationship of radio advertising with sales, and we can still fit a model. It could be something like this blue line, and it could give us some insight again that there is a positive relationship. In this case, we could say that, yeah, it looks more linear than with TV. And finally, we have newspapers, the relationship between newspaper and sales. It's not so clear that here there is a relationship. This would be the model anyway, but it might give us some intuition and say maybe that this is a let's say some model optimal in a certain sense, but maybe a model like that is not really different from the one in blue. And we will see how to start making this kind of claims about the linear model based on the data. But in any case, the thing about the linear model is that the relationship between the covariates is linear. So the relationship between the independent variables is linear. That is the structure. And that means two things. One, that is going to be easy to understand. It's going to be kind of easy to look into the model to answer specific questions and to try and understand what's happening with the object of study. But the downside is that it might be a too simple model. So it might be the case that having this linear relationship between the x's and the y's is not really offering a good fit to the data, and therefore our claims might not be really sustained on the data. Still, it's a very useful model, both conceptually and practically. Conceptually, because, well, it's been very, 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 very well studied. We know a lot about the linear model and how to use it. And it turns out to be the basis for many of the more complicated models that we have nowadays and that we will talk about in the course. The thing is that it's a very practical model because it's very easy. It's easy to reason about it. And we can actually build more complicated models just on the basis of this linear relationship. We'll see many examples. So what kind of questions can we answer with the linear model? Well, things like, is there a relationship between the independent variables and the outcome and the dependent variable? How strong is that relationship? How does it look like? What shape does the relationship have? And what of those predictors are the most important, or what are the predictors that seem to influence the most the outcome in the dependent variable? How can we predict new observations? Maybe the linear model is already fairly good to make predictions about our object of study. And are there interaction effects? Are there main effects? What can we say about the possible effect of one variable on the others? Maybe there's no effect. Can we start making these kind of claims? Can we compare, for example, the response across different groups? Things like that. So in the coming videos, we're going to see, first of all, how to fit a model. How do we choose the optimal model given the data? And then we're going to start making it more complex by adding more variables, categorical variables, numerical variables, interactions, etc., in order to build a model that best adjusts to our reality so that we can start looking into it and understand how that reality works.